Happy Wednesday evening and welcome back to Real Estate Mindset. Today we're going to go over what's going on with Volkswagen and the layoffs that they're doing and how that may impact the U.S. given that Volkswagen hasn't had any layoffs since 1994. After that, we're going to go into today's labor market report, which is the Jolts report. And after that, you guys, we're going to go into recessionary indicators like the 10 and the 2 inversion, as well as inflation indicators like M2, the Treasury General Account, reverse repo, and also the Fed holdings. And obviously, guys, I have Mitch Wexler here to help break that down for us today. And don't forget, you guys, if you want to join the movement with property tax and you want to educate yourself on what's going on, go to the description of this video, click the link to the petition, review it, sign it. And also, you guys, we are 50% done with the free template and course on how to fight property tax. That is also in the description. It's halfway done. I want you guys to empower yourself. So again, remember, if you've been following along on this journey, step 1, sign the petition. Step 2, take the course. It's free, and empower yourself. Mitch, happy Wednesday, sir. How are you?
It has been nonstop since Saturday. That's all I can say. It's absolutely been incredible. So it's all good. It's all good.
It's awesome to hear, man, and congratulations on being on George Gammon's channel. I watched that interview. It was absolute fire, sir.
Yeah, so sometime probably Friday or Monday. So Robert Helms has one as well that's coming out that we did yesterday. Very shortly, Peak Prosperity, I'm thinking we'll probably record that tomorrow. I don't know what his schedule is, but there's a lot going on. And the advantage is, just like you, because you have the real estate background. So even though I've got all the documents lined up for everybody to look at, they just start peppering me with questions.
Yes.
And it's good the way it's been coming out. So like I said, it's all good.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. And we'll keep pushing it. And you guys, real quick before we dig in, thank you. I think this is, deserving of a lot of our time and attention. This is a huge goal because we get to help society. So thank you, sir. We'll jump in right now, Mitch, to the Jolts report. This just came out today. Number of unemployed persons per job opening is what this is. Now, it did increase to 0.9. So number of unemployed persons per job opening is 0.9. So essentially, if you believe these numbers prior to the revisions, if you're unemployed, you should maybe be able to find one job. I want to point your attention, guys, to when we were coming out of the recession, again, out of the last recession, which is the GFC, not the lockdown recession. It was, January, number of unemployed persons per job opening, 5.3 unemployed people per job opening. It hurt, and it hurt bad, and I was in that situation. Now, a couple other headlines real quick. One being America has the fewest jobs available since January of 2021. So still some jobs available, but that is softening. Now, in addition to that, U.S. job openings declined to 7.67 million in July versus the 8.1 million expected. Mitch, is this Jolts report something that we should pay attention to? And is that even data that we should trust?
No, and no. There's simply, it's completely not relevant. So one of the things, the idea that somebody should go and get a job that they weren't even trained for or that they don't even like based on somebody in a golden tower saying, well, we think these are the numbers. As I said, you want the truth? Stand in front of a grocery store and ask people. Then you get to the truth. So does the Jolts report have anything to do with the stock market? No, stock market doesn't care. It's got nothing to do with a balance sheet or an income statement. So it's just more noise. And that's the best way to describe it, is white noise. It's just, that's all you get out of it. It means nothing.
I'm sure the market would agree because it doesn't seem like there was really any impact whatsoever on the market. We started with the VIX up about 10% this morning, but as I last look, the VIX was back down. I mean, what do you make of that, Mitch? I mean, seriously, on one hand, we have you and I even, and many other people have been warning of a recession, warning consumers. But on the other hand, and I know you've discussed this before, the market is seemingly doesn't care, and it's reaching potentially new all-time highs. You want to talk about that before we move on to Volkswagen and layoffs and the car industry meltdown?
Well, I think the fast summation would be that it is truly the fraud that is holding it's the glue of the economy is where we are right now. It's the only thing holding this up. And as we speak, NASDAQ is starting to move back down. It had a pretty rough day yesterday. I think we ended up down 500 or so yesterday. So, but we have to realize you got to take everything in context with the market. We're not that far from an all-time high. But the reality is if the Fed keeps pumping and they keep moving the monetary supply up and they keep inflation moving up, then the market's got to do something with that money. It's not even relevant what they're doing. They're just putting it to use and praying. But that, hope is not a solution, right? Going to work is a solution. So yeah, the market's going to do what the market's going to do, but that's not an effect or an effect on Main Street. So the bottom line is jobs, who's getting the jobs? Are the jobs available? What are the real numbers? And as I said, we're in a recession right now. And anybody that says we're not, you're delusional. And I keep coming back, go to the grocery store and take a look around. Look at who's really hurting. And you have to understand, because we've proven it, 37% of the households, multifamily and single family, just in Denton County alone, are in harm's way of bankruptcy and are losing the roof over their head. That's the real power in numbers when you understand what you're looking at.
Mitch, let's talk now about the layoffs. Let's talk about Volkswagen. And, let's dig deep a little bit on this because it's kind of a double whammy. There's been a price meltdown with specifically used cars. Yes, the car market in general, but used cars have been taking a beating. We see that in the CPI reports. I remember back, what was it, maybe 2020, 2021, people, Mitch, were paying $120,000 for a pickup truck on a 7-year loan. Absolutely ridiculous. So, do you recall the pandemonium with with people in the chips and just driving car prices up? And have you seen in your own market, before we go into Volkswagen, have you seen inventory start, exploding and increasing on the lots in your area, the car lots?
Yeah, I've actually seen a car company that happens to be owned by a friend of mine close. And they were in the used car market, everything, didn't matter what it was. They had thousands of vehicles, everything from Rolls Royce, Bentley, Mercedes, you name it, they had it. Defenders, pickups, and they sold it off because the market was literally falling apart as they were in the process of selling it. So that's firsthand experience. If you recall, about a year and a half ago, the press was saying, whoa, but you got to buy this amount of pickup. And yeah, it's going to cost you $70,000 or $80,000, even though it's 8 years old. So they were hyping out the crap out of this stuff. And none of it was true. The articles were straight up lies. Now, sure, there was somebody that would go and buy because they were desperate. But we had a contractor who I happened to have a conversation with about a week ago. And he bought a 3-year-old pickup for $9,000. And this is nice. I mean, I literally said, hey, you want to sell it? I would have bought it on the spot and double my money on the way out. But he went to an auction and he got it. So yes, that market is completely decimated. Now, think of why it's been decimated and it's going to get worse. Right back to the 37% of the households are going to lose the roof over their head. If they're going to lose the roof over their head, they don't have the money to go buy a car. They barely have the money to put food on the table. And therein lies the problem.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to choose to put food on their table before they make payments to an overvalued car they probably don't even want. And just to let y'all know what Mitch is saying, we have proof of this. The reason why a lot of people are making a big deal out of Volkswagen and the layoffs, again, because they've promised their employees that they would not do layoffs, and they've stuck to that promise since 1994. That is astonishing to me. I mean, this is a global meltdown happening right before our eyes. I mean, like Mitch said, the only thing that appears to be holding all of this up is the fraud. So it is in everyone's, they want to sell us anyways, Mitch, that it's in everyone's best interest to keep the fraud going. But I say otherwise. This article states Volkswagen aims to cancel a no layoffs pledge and won't roll out closing plants in Germany. Germany's Volkswagen says auto industry headwinds mean it can't rule out plant closing in its home country and must drop a long-standing job protection pledge in force since 1994 that would have barred layoffs through 2029. So these people, Mitch, are getting their rug pulled. And we see the rug pull happening all over with single mothers, these apartments and condos in Florida. I mean, these property taxes, everyone's getting rug pulled. Now, the European Auto automotive industry is in a very demanding and serious situation. So they're not doing good. He cited new competitors entering the European market. To your point, Lyft announces layoffs, will restructure its bikes and scooter business. Now, again, you guys look at the date here. This is today's date. This is Wednesday, as is the Volkswagen. So there are layoffs, and it is everywhere. Mitch, can you tell us whether or not you think a situation like what's happening with Volkswagen, longstanding, never laid off anyone apparently since 1994, do you think that will spread to the US, potentially create a bailout? Would that bailout stop layoffs? What do you think?
It's kind of the opposite of what you just said. It's spread from the US because we're dumping our problems on the rest of the world. So let's back up here for a second. If you have a $60,000 vehicle, you buy it new, your payments per year are roughly $7,200. Okay, therein lies the first set of problems. The second set of problems, as we outlined in the Fed video that we did, is that the Fed's damage has gone parabolic, straight up. And then you have the CADs, with the CADs committing the fraud, the damage is straight up. Two sets of fraud, both parabolic. Well, when you take into account those three issues, the bottom line is there is no money, as we keep saying. There's no money to pay for this. So the idea that Volkswagen is saying, well, we're going to have to do layoffs because we play globally with our brands and our vehicles. Well, yeah, no kidding. They got a balance sheet. They got an income statement. And if either one of those are working, they're going to do what they have to do in order to survive. But you see, it creates a circular argument because the cumulative compounding effect of these three issues tied at the hip, they're all tied, is what is going to cause mass layoffs. The more layoffs you have, the worse the problem becomes. And then we are right back to 2007.
So just to reiterate, obviously, Jolts numbers were under expectations. Layoffs are pretty much exploding in every industry, AI, the schools, tech, retail, obviously retail stores closing down. I mean, there's a lot going on. And I want to go to this next part, Mitch, which is going to take the viewers through a recessionary indicator, the 10 and the 2 inversion, which again is it's a recessionary indicator. We actually went uninverted. According to this data, we already went uninverted. We're back inverted again, but we hit uninversion, which in my opinion kind of starts that time clock, doesn't it, Mitch? If the 10 and the 2 uninvert, isn't that a signal like, okay, the pain is literally right around the corner?
No. So here's the deal. 10 and 2 is also meaningless, right? People have depended on that for years based on a set of criteria that was under the hood, that was dependable from the Federal Reserve. When the Federal Reserve started manipulating and moving the goalposts, the 10 and 2 became completely meaningless. What they should be looking at is quantitative easing, right? Because quantitative easing is in fact the creation of inflation. So quantitative easing equals inflation, inflation equals a tax, and that is why you're getting these charts that are straight up parabolic, and that is the fraud.
Okay, that's fair. Excuse me, it's kind of hard to depend on these indicators, Mitch, when those indicators are fraud. I'm starting to learn that. And, it's been so frustrating to me as someone that's been trying to be cautionate, talk a story of caution when the data, they keep manipulating and creating fraud with the data. So it's so good to go to the root of the issue, the overvaluation, the assessors, the CADs, all of that type of stuff. But let's now talk about the inflation that you were mentioning. Looking at this first set of fraud data, as Mitch would call it. I mean, it ended yesterday. It hasn't really updated today. You guys see that yet, but 0.04 per, basis point inverted. And I can't disagree with you, Mitch, because they're also manipulating the yields, the 10-year, the 2-year. So it should be reliable if we could trust it and if there was no manipulation. But regardless, you guys can see it did go uninverted August 28th. So it should be a big deal. According to Mitch, according to what we're saying, it's hard to rely on that with all the manipulation and fraud. But moving on to the inflation, take a look at this, Mitch. This is the overnight reverse repo market. It's sitting at $337 billion with a B. That is a lot. It's kind of been sideways ever since the beginning of August. Now, prior to that, it did trend downward, but that is a lot of inflation locked up in the market. At least it appears that way. Moving on to the Treasury General Account, the Treasury, Yellen. Why is everyone tripping? They still got $745 billion worth of inflation. I mean, $745 worth of money sitting right there, ready to go. Moving on to the Fed, okay? This is crazy right here, okay? Total assets, this is crazy, Mitch. Is this 7.1 trillion? Is that, let me just make sure. Yeah, that's with a T, $7.1 trillion. Thank you for the quantitative tightening, helpful, thank you. But doesn't look like it's enough, especially when I max this out. I mean, holy, Mitch, is that enough? Is that enough quantitative tightening, Mitch? Let's pause this. I mean, is that enough quantitative tightening? See, they only got 7.1 trillion left to go. What do you think about this quantitative tightening going on right now?
The numbers are their numbers. The problem is everybody's looking at the wrong set of numbers. It's simply not relevant. Right? You can say, okay, the 2-year interest rate is X as promoted by the government, which they had no business getting into in the first place in 1935, but okay, fine. They did it, it's their numbers. But under the hood is all that matters. Every time they say, well, we've got quantitative tightening, okay, that's good for the next 4 months. Now what are you idiots going to do? Then they're going to turn around and reverse it. Now we got quantitative easing. So the market is just no more than a ping pong ball getting batted back and forth between fake numbers, fake statistics, and none of it is relevant. And the reason why it's not relevant is because the only thing that matters is the economic engine that is generating the money, and that is mom and pop. If you destroy the economic engine, you are literally destroying your lives of yourself, because it's your money, your family, and your friends. Break it down, look at the balance sheet and the income statement of mom and pop, and if you destroy that, which is exactly what you've been doing, because we've got the math to prove it, you have in fact hurt the economic engine of the United States. And we exported our crap to the rest of the world, i.e. Germany, as you saw the other day when we did that video, and therein lies the problem. So Volkswagen is just saying, well, we got a problem and we may be shutting down plants and we may not be honoring our word. Well, okay, fine. They're not going to honor their word because they don't have the money to honor their word.
Right. I mean, just case in point, this should update any day. It hasn't updated yet, but we're at a national deficit for the fiscal year. The year's not over. It goes to October, but we're at 1.5 trillion. They don't have this money. This money is not helping me. This costing me money. And we can see M2 looking like it's going up a little bit, sitting at 21 trillion as far as M2 money supply. So this is all the money kind of sloshing around out there.
Do you know that there's 3,143 taxing districts in the United States? If you just simply said on 3,143 taxing districts, given the fact that Denton Central Appraisal District between 2017 and 2023 overvalued the market value by $67 billion, creating overtaxation somewhere around 1.34 billion, okay? Now, take that number just for fun. Take 3,143, multiply it by $1.5 billion in overvaluation. That is just short of $1 trillion per year being sucked out of the economy from mom and pop. Isn't it interesting? That $1.5 trillion you were just looking at, and by the way, my $1.5 billion is very ungodly conservative, but you get my point.
Yeah, it's actually 2 to 3 trillion in deficit. The only reason it looks like 1.5 trillion is because the fraud is masking the other 1.5 trillion in fraud. Is that what you mean, Mitch?
Yes, but you see, even if you say 143 or 147 trillion, including the unfunded liabilities, it's somewhere in that area. Nobody knows the whole truth. But the point of the matter is you're losing 1 to 2% a year just at the CAD level in terms of trillions of dollars by the overvaluation. And, George Gammon made a really interesting point between him and his attorney, which was their incentive is to keep the fraud going because the answer is sheer destruction. And my point is get in front of it to avoid the sheer destruction. There will be pain if you're in front of it. If you let it roll over you, absolutely. And that's what we've been saying since the beginning of these videos. Mitch,
there are people that are already run over, unfortunately, and I'm trying to get that message, out to people. There's people suffering right now of all classes, middle, low, whatever those classes are now. But, again, we showed the viewers the inflation, plenty of money, tons of money. but people can't afford that. And so can't we say, because those are what I showed the viewers, that inflation, that's not me. That's not my money. If it was my money, Mitch, we would be doing these in helicopters probably. Actually, we would be doing it in Africa, drilling wells, or at least I would, but to help people with water, because that's a huge problem. But, isn't it fair to say the market has been trying to buy its way out of recession? And if that's the case, if the market has been trying to buy its way out of recession, how long do you think they've been doing that? And how much longer can it even go on?
No, they're not buying their way out of recession. They can't stop it. We're already in a recession. The reality is what this is. This is the greatest wealth transfer ever conceived. These are human beings screwing over other human beings. So when you look at this, and the 37% is irrefutable. Nobody can beat up these numbers, right? So this is Denton County. Denton County is just ground zero because we happen to have the evidence focused solely on Denton County, but we're getting data from all over Texas. We're now getting data from all over the United States. And like I mentioned to you a couple of videos ago, the gentleman, a retired vet, ex-military, 84 years old, in a house that he bought for $24,000, and now he is being demanded to pay $3,100 a year in taxes on fixed income. None of this makes any sense. What's the end game? What are you going to gain by forcing him to sell his house to move into a seniors housing complex? This is about wealth transfer. When you look at what the Fed has done by virtue of quantitative easing, the Fed exists and was created in 1935 for the sole purpose of backstopping the banks. At that time, let's say there was 300 banks, just for the sake of conversation. Okay, give or take, there's over 5,500 banks right now today. The idea that the Fed can backstop these banks is complete lunacy. It simply isn't true. So what happens is, you pay your taxes, go get a second job in order to pay your taxes. If you don't pay the taxes, we're going to hold a gun to your head and take your house. Okay, and that's what they're doing. Therefore, they take the house. What really happens when they take the house? So in essence, it's the debt that is the greatest wealth transfer ever conceived. And that's why this is all criminal. When you've got the Fed, including unfunded liabilities, all government expenditures, straight up parabolic, there's no math to pay for this. When you've got the CADs, just like we saw the other day in Tarrant Appraisal District, all the school districts are jumping up and down. If you don't give us more money on an annual basis, never mind freezing, if you don't give us more money on an annual basis, we're bankrupt. And as I said, you're bankrupt today, never mind the bonds that you want tomorrow.
Well, and they've also
wealth transfer.
Well, yeah, I mean, because that is bankrupting normal Americans. Mitch, can you go into and really articulate, if you can, and I know you can, but how? Well, first of all, layoffs will wreck everyone, right? Layoffs are so bad, your value goes down. The municipalities are already bankrupt. They need people to keep working. But can you explain to the viewers how when layoffs actually start, it's a domino effect, right? Like if I get laid off from my job, I'm not going to go to Carl's Jr. or Subway because Subway closed down already. But I'm not going to go out to eat. That affects, retail. Those retail go to layoffs, and how even when the government intervenes and does quantitative easing and stimulus, those layoffs can continue for a decade, a half a decade. Can you explain that the power, Mitch, of that domino effect and how broken things really get when unemployment starts? We haven't had it in a decade and a half, would you say?
Okay, so let me back up just for a second. I have a friend who is higher up in the United Auto Workers, and he was brought in to Arlington. There was roughly 5,000 employees in the Arlington plant, and he was brought in to negotiate the increase in pay for the employees, which was successful. Well, in the last 3 years, by virtue of the taxes being applied fraudulently, the value received by the employees was then stripped out by the additional real estate taxes. The net sum gain, zero. So when you have that problem, and that's magnified across the United States, the reality is that the income per person has not kept up with the fraud which is the inflation, which is the quantitative easing. These things are hooked at the hip. And that is the true formula that should be studied. Whatever the Fed's pumping out on the 2%, yeah, it's a real number. I'm not disagreeing with that, or the 10% yield. Great. It doesn't mean anything, because if mom and pop can't afford to buy, this whole system will fall apart, and seriously fall apart, where everybody in the chain will get damaged. And that's why I even said the other day, if you're a billionaire and you got 400 employees, and out of the 400, give or take half of them, for sake of conversation, 200 show up, say, we can't pay our taxes. What are you, Mr. Billionaire, going to do?
Hope the Fed bails them out.
Yeah, good luck with that, because the Fed doesn't have the money. If you create more quantitative easing, you're literally creating the Weimar Republic, where you're going to need a bucket full of money to go buy a loaf of bread. You're going to have
Are you worried?
inflation on one hand, and what you're seeing in the automobiles is complete deflation. And these two things can exist at the same time.
Some would argue, Mitch, that that's happening right now. Can you see a situation to where the U.S. turns into a country like that? Can you see that happening?
Sure, it's happened throughout history dozens of times. It's not that unusual. The problem is it's created by fools, and I'm calling them fools on purpose, because if you're that desperate of a person to hurt your family and hurt your friends, and when somebody tells you you're breaking the law and you choose to do nothing about it, both under the Texas Penal Code and federal code, you are known as a guilty party and a party of knowledge, right? What could only be that one definition? You're a sociopath. You don't give a about anybody but yourself, and you're willing to screw the entire world over and destroy the economic engine of the United States of America to suit your ideology, whatever the hell it is, and you're wrong. And that's why we're here doing these videos. I mean, we have the evidence. There is no defense against any of this evidence, none.
You know, let me ask you what your thoughts are on the fraud continuing, because again, when you were on, George, Robert made that point, and we've talked about it multiple times, how the fraud is actually keeping the whole system together. And so knowing that, Mitch, and knowing, and we went back into what I think the 1960s, 1970s, after the gold standard was dust. I mean, it got out of control as far as the Keynesian economics, money printing, government bailouts, out of control. If I have a hard time thinking there's not going to be any bailout. I think there's going to be some type of bailout, but Mitch, how do you think a bailout would work in the future? Is it, and can you explain it? Will that even help households? And won't it potentially only help the banks' bigger wealth gap? Tell me about the future bailout. Do you think it's possible? What effect do you think that's going to have?
I think people can model it. And the Mahalanobis model is one way to model it. However, it requires many inputs. And the problem is nobody can really quantify what all those inputs are. The problem that we're in is that people at the Federal Reserve level or the US Treasury level, they act on emotion without the benefit of intellect. And the intellect is necessary at this point in time. And if you go back and look at one of those charts that we had in the last video, and you look at how in the Nixon era, for several years, roughly 8 years, about 6 years after we were knocked off the gold standard, you notice that the debt didn't climb. So people were so used to saying, we're within this bracket, we will not spend outside of our bracket, that it didn't move, roughly. So the point of the matter is, then you move 15 years later, and it's never stopped moving straight up since. And it's gotten worse every 4 to 5 years under the rule of 72, which is just natural math, right? It just keeps getting parabolic and parabolic. There simply is no money to pay for it. So when you say, can we bail it out again? Yeah, but the reality is, like I said, that didn't work in the Weimar Republic. That's not working in Japan. It didn't work in Germany. It didn't work in Mesopotamia. It didn't work under Cleopatra. These civilizations collapsed for two reasons: debt and debauchery. Well, take a good look in the mirror.
Well said, sir. Let me get your thoughts on the Chevron doctrine. You've helped, a ton of people have helped me come to the conclusion. Melody, Jack, the DNN. Can't we say that the Chevron doctrine was like allowing the fraud to go hyperspeed systemically through the system? Chevron giving the agencies the authority to rule over law and interpret law and enforce law. Can you explain, is it too late? Did the Chevron doctrine take us to the point where this is unreversible?
The Chevron doctrine absolutely contributed irrefutably to this problem that we're in. The Chevron doctrine gave governments a line to tell the courts, and gave a line to tell Main Street, and gave a line to tell Wall Street. And that was, well, we're doing it for the betterment of the government, and we're doing it for the betterment of society. The problem was, it was a line of complete BS. So when you say, can we keep it going? Well, Chevron doctrine is dead. So in other words, the governments they can't rely on that line anymore. The problem is, we're at the tipping point. The Fed has created a parabolic chart that simply, it is reversible. The only question is, will it be reversible in a quantified manner, peacefully, slowly? There will be pain, but it wouldn't be a disaster. Or does it turn into a snowball that just simply is going to go straight down? And what I end up at the tail end, when you look at the charts, if it becomes the case, you're likely to have a 61% pullback, which coincidentally is a Fibonacci number, but they do occur. So yeah, I mean, the question is this going to be controllable, or is this just going to be straight up snowball going downhill and it ends when it ends?
And I asked that, Mitch, honestly, because it seems to me that the central appraisal districts, which to the viewer, when we say CAD, remember the CAD stands for the Central Appraisal District. It seems like, Mitch, that this Chevron doctrine allowed these central appraisal districts, the CADs, to steal our homes out from underneath us. Now, people with the super low tax rates and liabilities may not feel and understand what we're saying, but us in Texas, at least, Mitch, that have extreme variations of property taxes and extreme differences, and it almost looks like hate. If someone hates you, they can increase your property taxes. I mean, this is a real concern. And so we need restriction, and we need transparency and accountability. And my question to you, Mitch, is do you think that Basel III, which would require the banks to hold twice the amount of liquidity, do you think that's enough, or is it not enough? I mean, they can't even, and I ask you, they can't even tell us when that's going to start.
Okay, so the state of Texas, in my humble opinion, for what it's worth, has done an end run around its own constitution. In other words, the state of Texas has created its own version of Chevron deference. When you understand that USPAP is being violated and the state knows it, irrefutably knows it, because they've been put on notice multiple times, not only from our whistleblower, but from me and other people. So the state irrefutably knows what the problems are. When you take into consideration USPAP is being ignored, USPAP is required under the Texas Property Tax Code. Under the Texas Constitution, uniform and equal is required. 1, 2, 3, ignored. Under the US Constitution, First Amendment, Fifth Amendment, 14th Amendment, 16th Amendment, all violated. The state of Texas has created their own version of Chevron deference. And that's why I said several videos ago, I actually believe we are headed, as in my lawsuit, to the Supreme Court, because our evidence is irrefutable. The only thing they tried to throw up was, well, we have qualified immunity, and we blew the doors off of that because no, you don't, because all those things that I just mentioned, every single one of them is a requirement in law. It's not a discretion. Chief appraiser doesn't have the discretion to say, I'm not going to use USPAP. In fact, it's the second paragraph on the first page of their website. We adhere to USPAP. Problem is, you don't, because we've got the evidence that says just the opposite. So, in fact, the state of Texas has done an end run around its own constitution. Then the next thing you said was, well, what about the banks and the tier one capital? I think I said somewhere along the line, one of the reasons that I'm doing what I'm doing and not building is because I would require, if I borrow money from a bank, I would require that that bank hold that note on their balance sheet, and or I would have a first right of refusal so that the note doesn't get sold out from underneath me. So they don't have, if they package the note and they simply say, we're just the middleman, we don't know from anything, whoever the bank is, okay? Then they package it and they want to sell it off. Well, that means that they don't have the tier one capital to hold a Class A note. therein lies the problem. If your tier one capital doesn't exist, and you think you're going to hold your hand out to the feds to backstop you, I don't know what the feds are going to do. I wouldn't, but I can add.
That's all they have left, Mitch. They have nothing out. There's no math. There's no logic. And real quick, just for the viewers, when Mitch and I say USPAP, okay, USPAP stands for and correct me if I'm wrong, I always get like the S wrong, but Uniform Standard Professional Appraisal Practices.
Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practices.
Dang it, I say standard. Dang it, I did that with Jeremy. I embarrassed myself. It's standards. I say standard. So uniform standard. What that means, guys, is it's a formula. It's a mathematical formula that's designed to hold these people accountable, and they're not using that very effective formula. And actually, I take the bet. It's not even very effective. Even that, and that's how Mitch and I found each other. I was beating up the front end appraiser saying, hey, you guys got to start doing this the right way, the uniform standards, professional appraisal practices, and they weren't. So it's designed to help you. And that's why you guys need to hit the link in the description, get an advanced start on fighting property taxes, because we have until 2025. We have 3 months. I want you guys to preview the class, take the first half of it. It's in the description. Mitch, great conversation, man. Sir, How do you want to take us out of here, man? Can you give us kind of an outro? How are we going to talk in essence some maybe hope, not false hope, but some hope, maybe some solution?
The more people that know about this, the more people that can defend themselves, regardless of what happens in the ARB hearings. Stay cool, stay calm. When you have the evidence on your side, eventually you will win. You may not win in an ARB hearing, but then you can go to 3 or 4 people that are friends of yours and say, let's join forces together and go after these people in your community. There's no doubt that all these central appraisal districts across the United States have one form of a problem or another. So it's just a matter of being smart and understanding what it is that you need to do to put your family and yourself in the best position not to be extorted on these taxes. This is going to take a little bit of time, but we are working on it. Within a couple of weeks, we'll have this stuff out to the point where Travis's program will work so that you can line up what it is that you need in order to make that next step in front of an ARB. Just be smarter than they are. And honestly, it's not that difficult.
And the reality is, guys, if we didn't have to pay so much money in taxes and in fees for the middleman, we wouldn't even need 2 jobs to begin with, and we wouldn't be in the situation to begin with. It's just the problem is we got so much fraud to pay for it. And it's not even, the last 4 years. It's like the last 40 years. Pretty much, Mitch, it seems like as soon as we went off the gold standard, that's when fraud was just bred and just blossomed. And it is an unfortunate thing. But again, you guys, hopefully we're helping. Hopefully we're giving back. We're changing society. We're serving. We're loving. We're trying to practice what we preach. Leading by example. In other words, just please, guys, take the course. I made that course when I was sick. I had a cold. So if I made that course when I had a cold, come on, man, just 30 minutes. 30 minutes for the first half. Take it, empower yourself so we can start talking and moving forward.
Yeah,
Other than that, yeah, go ahead, Mitch.
I just want to say one more thing. If you understand what's happening in your life, the more people that know, the more people that see these videos, the more strength as a society we have. And the last judge we were in front of, he hit the nail on the head when he said this is a societal issue. Phenomenal words. And that is what we're dealing with. So there are solutions. The infrastructure for a uniform sales tax does exist. It's not perfect today, but that can be rectified real fast because the infrastructure is there. There are solutions to this. It's just a matter of getting the people that perceive that they've got power, whatever that definition may be to them. We have to make them realize what the issue is and get on board. Because if they don't, they're going to have other problems.
Well said, sir. And Mitch, once again, man, I appreciate you helping to lead the community, and I appreciate your time, your expertise, and the love that you give back, sir. Now, if you're out there investing in real estate or really just living your life, guys, we wish you luck and we hope you win.